Thank you very much for being here this evening. Thank you to the shul leadership for making this possible, and to Judah for setting up the Zoom. And thank you to Ann and Mark for bringing the shiur to our community this evening. Le'ilei nishmas, Adira Shoshana, Bas Moshe Yitzchak, B'chaya Menucha. Adira's brother Jeremy is going to begin the program this evening. I've gotten to know Jeremy somewhat over the last 2.5 years as somebody of dry humor, of rich depth, and a strong sense of right and wrong. Jeremy's going to present his own remarks as well as those of his brother Aaron, who is, I think, watching from Florida.
Okay, thank you all for being here. Thank you for introducing me. These remarks were written by my brother Aaron and I. Today marks 3 years since we lost our sister, Adira Shoshana Rose Koffsky. As you can imagine, the last 3 years have been very difficult for me and our family. We miss her deeply and dearly. One of the challenges we experienced is how to remember and dignify Adira's legacy. Obviously, nothing can replace her, so what should we do? And why should we do it? Why do anything at all? Also, today Adira would be 21, would be a different person, more grown up than she was at 18. So one thing that our family concluded was that whatever we do should be a comfort for us. Telling stories about Adira gives us comfort. All of you here comforts us, so thank you. And we loved Adira. We continue to love her. Talking about her makes us happy, even if it's hard to talk about, even if we look sad doing it. But Adira was someone different to everyone. She was a friend, a daughter, a sister, cousin, granddaughter, niece, acquaintance, friend of a friend, daughter's friend. So many unique relationships. My brother and I knew her for 18 years and found out a lot of new things about her that we didn't know during the 7 days we sat shiva for her in February 2023. In our life, Adira was our younger sister who we cared for and looked out for. In death, she's become kind of a role model for us, motivating us to be kinder, to insist upon justice when things are unfair, to be there for friends, to love people for who they are, as Adira would. Adira loved Judaism. She was proud to be Jewish. So we're honored today to be joined by one of Adira's high school teachers, Rabbi Shneeweiss, who greatly inspired that love of Torah and Judaism. In the week that we sat shiva, a lot of people visited us. Some of you in this room did that. Thank you. But Rabbi Shneeweiss definitely stood out when I think about memories of that. He came in with a eulogy he had written that was very powerful. And I remember he had just was saying hi to my parents. And I was like, oh, can I read it? So I took it and started reading. And he was just talking. And then he stopped me about a minute. And he was like, stop reading. I want to read it. So he read it aloud to us. It was very powerful. And it was evident to me that he was a really special person to Adira, really knew her, understood her. He's a special kind of teacher. I think we all have teachers in our life who don't make a huge impact on us, maybe. And then there are those who really can change our lives, see us for who we are, believe in us when we don't believe in ourselves, make us better people. Adira Rabbi Shneeweiss in his life to do that, and I think it's an honor for us to hear from him tonight. It's my hope that with his remarks tonight, we together are reminded and inspired by who Adira was to us, what qualities we remember her by, how we can bring them, by extension, her into our lives. Doing so is an honor to our family, to Adira and her legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I also want to make sure to mention there's a Marav minion at the end. We have here in the shul a weekly shiur. It goes on Sunday mornings. It's called 14 Centuries. It's basically a history of Torah, a history of writing about Torah. And Ann is a regular participant. And this morning, we started talking about Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra. And preparing for the shiur, I remembered a comment that I heard years ago in different places that the Rambam told his son, you should really learn Ibn Ezra. But I'd never seen the text that it came from. So I went looking online and I found a letter that's attributed to the Rambam, but the language seemed off. It didn't sound quite right. And so I started looking to see if anybody had written about it. And lo and behold, this is Friday. I found Rabbi Shneeweiss's Substack column on it from this past December, unpacking the logical and textual reasons to doubt the authenticity of that letter. Doubt is a strong enough word? Yeah. Okay. And that led me further into his Substack. The creative and funny artwork at the top of each post, the iconoclastic approach to the givens of our community on matters great and small, his highly articulate expression, his attention to language, and the fact that throughout he comes across as very human, very down to earth, very real. And then I understood why you asked him to speak for Adira's yahrzeit. I came to West Hempstead just too late to meet Adira Zichronah Livracha. My first visit was shortly after her shiva. I came to know Adira through her writing and through the memories and observations of her family and friends. And what I saw in Rabbi Schneeweiss's writing explains a lot about why she adored you as a teacher. Adira was creative, funny, articulate, and definitely iconoclastic and human and real. So it's very appropriate that we have Rabbi Schneeweiss here to speak for her yahrzeit. Just to give Rabbi Schneeweiss's formal bio, Rabbi Schneeweiss learned at Yeshiva B'nai Torah while earning a BA in psychology from Torah, an MA in Jewish education from Azrieli. After receiving smicha from Yeshiva B'nai Torah, he taught at Haftar High School, then moved on to Midreshet Shalhevet, where he taught a variety of Limudei Kodesh and English classes. Rabbi Schneeweiss is the author of the blog Kol HaSridim, featuring hundreds of articles on Torah and Jewish philosophy. His many classes in yeshiva are characterized by curiosity-driven learning, transformative insights, and real-world application. I should note as well, when we first sent out the message that he was coming to speak, I heard from more than one person in the community that they love his writing online and that they've watched his classes. As the director of student learning, he is committed to helping each student achieve his potential. And thank you very much for coming here this evening, Rabbi Schneeweiss.
Okay, so thank you very much to Mark and Ann and to the Koffsky family for honoring me with this. 3 disclaimers, okay? Let's just get out of the way. There's a lot of awkwardness around how you're supposed to feel when giving a shiur on an occasion that's very somber. I just want to say, obviously, we would all rather not be here for this occasion. But insofar as we are here, I hope I can share Torah in a way that I think Adira would have enjoyed and that hopefully you can enjoy as well. And I don't want anyone to mistake my enthusiasm for anything having to do with the occasion. It's all from the Torah that we're going to be saying here. Second disclaimer is that so we had to choose the title of the shiur very early, a couple months in advance. And I was not sure what the audience was going to be like. You know, the official title is Shlomo and Slytherin. And I think I even heard someone asking just now, you know, what is Slytherin? And we've joked about, is that a Chasidish rebbe? You know, something like that. And so the original title I proposed was actually Shlomo, Soloveitchik, and Slytherin, but we felt it was a little bit too much alliteration. I just want to give a disclaimer. A friend of mine quoted a student of Rav Soloveitchik. I don't know who the student was, and I don't know the context, but they said anyone who says Torah in the name of Rav Soloveitchik, other than Rav Soloveitchik, is Bechezkas comic books, meaning that you can't rely on anything that anyone says in the name of Rav Soloveitchik. And I just want to give a disclaimer. There's this book that this shiur is going to be inspired by, Maimonides Between Philosophy and Halacha, by Lawrence Kaplan, who's a big Talmud of the Rav. I did not read the book. I read his intro, and some comments of his inspired me and made me instantly think of Adira. And so I'm going to be sharing ideas. You know, when you see a movie that is, you know, based on a true story, you're like, all right, maybe it's not so. And then a movie that is inspired by a true story, even less. So treat this as inspired by Rav Soloveitchik. I'm not speaking for him. I'm just speaking for the ideas that I understood, okay? And then the third thing is I went over a sketch of this, an outline of this shiur before I spoke. One of my friends who's a rabbinic colleague. And I gave him like the broad strokes of the shiur. And he said, okay, let me give you some blunt feedback. I like the ideas, but it's going to come across as a wackadoodle shiur. Okay, that was the name, that was the word that he used. Okay, wackadoodle shiur. And I think he was concerned because I am giving a shiur that involves Harry Potter and other things like that. And I said, I understand. And, you know, I told him that I don't know who's going to be here. And it's a lecture style shiur, which I'm very, very not comfortable with, by the way. I'm used to discussions. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand. Okay. I'm just not, it's hard to have a discussion with a room like this. But, you know, he was concerned about how people are going to perceive the shiur. And I said, you know what? I understand your concern, but I'm giving this shiur in memory of Adira. This is the Torah that Adira would have liked, and I'm giving this with the Koffskys. I cleared it with them. So if you perceive that the Torah that I'm giving is a little wackadoodle, that's your problem. That's not my problem, okay? So hopefully we can all like just explore the ideas that we're going to be learning here today. Okay, so by a show of hands, again, I did not know who's going to be here. By show of hands, how many of you have are familiar enough with Harry Potter that like you would recognize the name Slytherin? Okay, it's the majority. Okay, that's good. That's good. I'll give a little intro. I promise you that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I actually did I give a women's shiur on Thursdays. I did a dry run and we ended up talking about Harry Potter for an hour. That's not going to happen here. Okay, I'm just going to give you enough information to be able to follow the shiur. But let me tell you why I decided to call this shiur, why I decided to give a shiur on this. And I mentioned this in the eulogy, but I can't say this is my earliest memory of Adira, but it was the first class that I taught Adira in, and it was a class in Sefer Daniel. And I actually went back. Apparently I wrote a Facebook note about this without mentioning her name. And I had to go back and check the date and the seating chart to make sure that this was actually plausible, that this was Adira. I'm pretty sure it was. That I made some reference to Tom Riddle, to one of the characters in Harry Potter. And she came over to me in her meek, shy way, you know, and she barely knew me. And she said, I like the Tom Riddle reference, you know? And then she saw my Slytherin keychain and her eyes went wide in a very Adira way. She said, you're Slytherin? And I was on my way to another class. So I said, we'll talk about it later. Went back and I happened to be wearing the Slytherin colors that day, not for any of those reasons. Next day I came back and I was wearing blue and I had my Ravenclaw keychain. And I said, okay, I have this philosophy of Slytherin and like, I think all the Slytherins are wrong. And like, this is why. And she's like, yeah, it makes sense that you're a Ravenclaw. And so that's what we bonded over initially. And I wanted to give this shiur because the more I thought about it, the more I thought about Adira and the more I've heard of her. I mean, we've all learned a lot more about Adira since her passing, just from hearing all these testimonies, seeing her writings. So I realized it wasn't just that she liked Slytherin, like she really, really embodied a lot of the traits. And I wanted to try to unpack that, okay? So let me give a brief intro. Again, I promise I will not talk about the Harry Potter houses for the whole time, but there's a school called Hogwarts, okay? It's a school of witchcraft and wizardry. When you go there as a student, you are sorted into one of four houses, okay? Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. And I think when we read Harry Potter as kids or when we read the first books, we tend to associate each of these houses as being associated with traits, okay? Oh, by the way, I should, full disclosure, I've only read the books and seen the movies. I'm not into any of the like fan fiction or the sequels, whatever. So I'm, you know, this is a canon, okay? So you associate these things with traits, and I'll demonstrate this, okay? When I say Gryffindor, what traits come to mind? Just yell them out. Bravery, courage. What else? Honesty. Okay, right, good. Right. What about Ravenclaw? Smart, intellect, books, studying, all this, right? Hufflepuff. Crickets. No. Loyalty, right? Togetherness, community, all this stuff. And in Slytherin, evil, bad guys, and you know, ambition, racism. Okay, right? So cunning, yeah. So the problem is that Slytherin has a bad reputation. Okay, and that's why when you find someone who identifies as Slytherin, you have to have a discussion about it. Like, are you secretly like a terrorist or like a, you know, someone like, or do you have a different understanding? So I have a different theory about the houses. Okay, and again, this is just my own theory. I haven't read any of the stuff, but each of the houses is defined not by traits, but by a core value. And the value can have positive expressions and negative expressions. Okay, so I'm gonna shift this now for people who have no idea what I'm talking about to just embrace the terms and think about people you know let's start with Ravenclaw. Think of people you know who are very knowledge-oriented or intellect-oriented, okay? So you can see that there are a lot of great things about knowledge. Knowledge is intrinsically good, you know, it is, you know, there's technology, there's progress, there's creativity, but there's also a dark side, right? Along with individual thinking, you have conspiracy thinking, you know, along with people who are valuing the collaborative effort of knowledge, you have people like Rabbi Akiva's students who were stingy with their Torah and were competitive and viewed it as a means of superiority. Yes. Exactly. To the exclusion of others, correct, right. You have people not being in touch with their own emotions. You have people not being in touch with other people's emotions. You have head in the clouds. So that's Ravenclaw, okay. Hufflepuff, you have inclusivity, you have acceptance, you have togetherness, loyalty, but you also have the dark side of that, which is inclusivity to the point where you're including people that are damaging to the community. You're blurring the lines between good and bad. You are maybe, there's modesty, but then there's also the point where you become a people pleaser. You become someone who is not standing up for yourself. You don't have an identity. Then there's Gryffindor. There's the heroism and bravery and courage, but then there's also recklessness and a certain disregard for rules. Yeah. Main character syndrome, right? There's also a certain in-group bias where like they say that they're the good guys, but you can't really picture them actually caring about all of humanity. It's really just their own group. So now with Slytherin, okay, you've got these negative qualities, okay, of the ambition and the cunning and the slyness and using people. But I think the definition of Slytherin is selfishness. Okay, now that sounds bad, especially the people in like an American, Judeo-Christian ethos, but I'm gonna try to convince you otherwise, okay? So selfishness. And there are good qualities associated with selfishness of becoming an individual, certain leadership qualities, also being able to not fall prey to what the crowd is doing. And what I would like to, self-preservation, right? That's a very important thing. So, I was thinking about these houses according to this theory. All right, now the Harry Potter part's almost over. Okay, we're switching into the Torah part now. So if I ask the average Jewish high school student who knows Harry Potter, which of these is endorsed by Torah? Which of these values is endorsed by Torah? I think it's much easier for people to make an argument for the other three houses. Okay, Ravenclaw is about knowledge. We say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. We say that knowledge is the way that we get to love of God and fear of God. I don't think I need to convince anyone that Judaism is about knowledge, okay? Hufflepuff, with community and peace, we have the Rambam at the end of Hilchos, Megillah, וחנוכה, Gadol HaShalom, Shekol HaTorah Nitna Lasos Shalom Ba'olam. The entire Torah was given to promote peace in the world. Darchacha Darchei Noam B'chol Nasifo Seh HaShalom. All of its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. So I don't think we need to sell you on that. And then Gryffindor, if you had to say something, I think Midos, developing, the value I associate with Gryffindor is honor, not in the way we use honor, but in the way that the founding fathers used honor, of like a certain sense of living up to ideals and bringing them into the country and organizing society around things that are actually admirable. And there is a certain regard for the way people will look at you. Yeah, Shiva? Dueling? Right, that would be a negative aspect of it, correct. I don't think we're in favor of dueling here. So I think you could say that that's represented by Midos, but selfishness is a little bit of a trickier thing for, I think, most people to say. Is selfishness something that the Torah promotes? And to what extent? How far can you take it? So the thesis that I would like to propose tonight is I want to show not only that the Torah endorses selfishness, but that there is a uniquely Slytherin path to Torah, that you can follow selfishness all the way from the beginning of your development all the way to the highest levels of Torah, okay? That's going to be the goal. Yeah, Ashley. Okay, I think that's debatable, but that's a good point, though. It's a good point. Yes, Shua. Take care of yourself before, yeah. Okay, all right. So I'm glad you're already starting to think in terms of the lines that we're going to do, in terms of the lines that we're going to be taking. I want to start from a very specific place. Okay, so we're transitioning from the Slytherin part of the shiur to the Shlomo part of the shiur. Okay, one of my big regrets, and it's not like this was my fault, but I taught at Shalhevet for 10 years. I got to teach Adira for the first 2 of those years, for 9th and 10th grade. I so regret not being able to teach her my favorite sefer and my favorite subject, which is Sefer Mishlei. Okay, Mishlei, book of Proverbs, written by Shlomo HaMelech, who is also a Slytherin, as I hope I will show. But if I had to pick one thing to teach, it would be Mishlei. One thing to learn, it'd be Mishlei. And you might be wondering, like, do people really learn Mishlei? It is a criminally understudied book, okay? I know people like learning Musar, and I think when you ask them what they mean by Musar, they either talk about the classic Musar works like Mesilas Yesharim and Chovos HaLevavos, which are great, and Musar movement stuff, that's great. But the one who founded the genre was Shlomo HaMelech. The book is L'da'as Chachma u'Musar, to know wisdom and Musar, which loosely translated is character development or discipline, okay? So it is the book that you should learn by the person who was the wisest, wisest man certainly of his time. But the way that I learn and teach Mishlei is very idiosyncratic. Okay, I learned from my rebbe, Rabbi Moskowitz Zatzal, but he learned from Sadia Gaon. Okay, Saadia Gaon was one of the earliest commentators, after Chazal that has, voluminous works, and he wrote a commentary on Mishlei. And he approaches Mishlei in a radically different way than I think many girls' seminaries teach Mishlei. Okay, no offense to anyone who went to a girls' seminary and learned Mishlei, but just from hearing people talk about it. Shlomo learns Mishlei as a book for how to apply chachma, wisdom, to your everyday decision-making in order to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Okay, let me say that one more time. It's a book about how to apply chachma, wisdom, to your everyday life to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Okay, you can see this explicitly in his intro, which is very long, and I'm going to read you one paragraph where he lays out his theory of psychology, but also what the purpose of Mishlei is. So I'm going to read this. I'm going to read all the sources in English, unless I want to read the Hebrew here, but I have the sources if you want. He says, the instinctual part of a person, the animalistic part, recoils from everything that wearies and pains him in the immediate. This is due to a vice called atzlus, laziness. Okay, so pause here for a second. I think we can relate to this. There's a part of us that does not want to endure any immediate pain. Okay, that he's calling laziness. That's the Mishlei definition of laziness, which is its own shiur. Just think about how radical that definition is. It's an interesting definition. Likewise, the instinctual part of a person inclines and yearns toward things which bring him immediate enjoyment and pleasure. This is due to the vice called ta'ava, desire or lust. So I don't think this is radical. We have part of us that wants immediate pleasure and part of us that wants to avoid immediate pain. Okay, this is basic animalistic nature 101. Okay, but then he says, therefore, everyone needs the guidance of a chacham, of a wise man, who will reveal to him the ultimate end of what gladdens the instincts, yet is harmful in the eyes of the intellect, and the ultimate end of what is deemed bad by the instincts, yet benefits the intellect. Then he will bear the exertion and strive for that whose end is good, and he will refrain from that to which desire draws him on account of its bad end. In other words, we're drawn to the immediate pleasure and to avoid the immediate pain, but we need to see beyond the immediate. And the only one who can provide that is a chacham who can say, stop, don't give in to your immediate desires. Let's see what the ultimate benefits are that you're missing out on, and let's see what the ultimate consequences are, the detrimental consequences that are harming you if you take this course of action. The best definition of chachma in this context is really given by Chazal. So people know the Pirkei Avos, Ezehu Chacham Halomen Mikol Adam, who is wise, one who learns from everyone. People don't know the one in Maseches Tamid, Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, Ezehu Chacham Haroa Es Hanolad, who is wise, one who sees the consequences, one who sees the outcomes of your decisions. Okay, so that's the type of chachma that Mishlei is advocating. Okay, chachma to point out the long-term benefits and consequences. And what Mishlei does is it's showing you in everyday life how to maximize the long-term pleasurable, beneficial outcomes of your decisions. But it is also a commentary on Torah and showing you why keeping mitzvos will bring you that life. In other words, the kid who is raised, in a halachic system, some kids are okay with it. Some kids are Hufflepuffs and they're rule followers, but other kids resist it and they don't like it. And they feel it's something being imposed upon them that is going to take away from their enjoyment in life. And it's understandable because they want immediate gratification. They want to avoid immediate pain. And when you can't play video games on Shabbos, that's immediate pain and it's bad. But what Mishlei does is it shows you how the mitzvos, if you follow the system, it will train you to, it will bequeath you a life where ultimately you are maximizing pleasure. And I'm not talking about in Olam Haba. I'm not talking about in the world to come. I'm talking about in this world, you will live a more enjoyable life and avoid harmful consequences. Okay, so that's the approach of Mishlei. Now again, yes. Right. Okay, so there are definitely overlaps. I don't think we're going to get into the differentiation, but there are definitely overlaps there. So yeah, that is correct. And you can learn a lot from them in terms of Mishlei as well. Okay, so this does not sound so radical, but I want to give you some examples from the Mishlei itself. I want to give you some big picture examples and then some small picture examples, all right? So big picture examples, the very first piece of advice that Shlomo gives his reader, and he's writing for, he calls him my son. Mostly it is not a biological son, but it's a student, but he says my son. So the first piece of advice he gives his son is don't join a gang and kill people and steal their money. Okay, I assume that, maybe Jewish youths back then are different. I don't think a lot of Jewish youths in West Hempstead like that's their temptation. I don't really know what's Hempstead, but that was what he had to tell them evidently. So listen to the argument he makes. Okay, I'm going to give you the directive and pause before the reasoning. Okay, so this is in Mishlei 1:10 through 19. My child, my son, if sinners seduce you, do not be enticed. If they say, come with us, let us wait in ambush for bloodshed. Let us lurk for an innocent one without cause. Like the grave, let us swallow them alive, whole, like those descending to the pit. All precious wealth is found with them. We will fill our houses with spoils. Cast your lot among us. There will be one pouch for us all. Okay, so you get the picture? Like joining the gang, roving the streets, okay? So if you were telling your son, why shouldn't you kill and steal? I think most people would say, because it's wrong, because it's usser, because it is unjust, murder is bad, stealing is bad. So what does he say? He says, my child, do not walk on the way with them. Withhold your feet from their pathways. For their feet run to do evil and they hasten to spill blood. For is the net spread out in the eyes of every winged creature for no reason? Rather, they, the hunters, wait in ambush for their blood and look for their lives. Thus are the ways of all who chase illicit gain. It will take the life of its possessors. Now, let me translate that into English. Okay, according to many of the Mefarshim, including the commentary attributed to the Radak, he says, basically, if you start stealing stuff, you will get caught and the king will put you to death. Okay, and if you look at Mishlei's psukim about theft throughout, then you'll see that is the type of argument he makes. It's not a morality-based argument. It's not a God-based argument. It's not you're going to get punished in the afterlife type of argument. It's you're going to become addicted to this behavior and it's going to be great in the immediate, but then there's going to be consequences and they could be permanent. So that's how he tells his son not to steal. Okay. Another example for the positive this time. So a lot of the first 9 chapters of Mishlei are introductory, and he's like advertising what the book is going to be about. So he has a lot of ads for Chochmah, for wisdom. Now, if I ask you, why do Jews value wisdom? You would say a lot of the stuff that I said about Ravenclaw, that we love knowledge for its own sake. There's no higher level than Torah Lishma, Ovid Me'ahava, learning out of love of God. Wisdom is beneficial for society. But no, he says, happy is the person who has found wisdom, the person who derives understanding, for its commerce is better than the commerce of silver, and its produce than fine gold. It's more precious than pearls, and all your desires cannot compare to it. Length of days is at its right, at its left, wealth and honor. All just selfish benefits for why you should learn Chochmah. You're going to get wealth, honor, it's better than all your desires, and he explains because it's going to lead to all your desires. You're going to be able to get what you want even more through Chochmah. Another example of advertising Chochmah, so this is Chochmah talking, personified. I am wisdom, I dwell in cunning, which, pause there, another note for Slytherin, okay? The Hebrew word is arum. Now, arum is used in Mishlei as a positive quality of cunning. But if I ask you, who's the only character in Tanakh that you know who is described as arum? The Nachash, the snake, right? So this is Shlomo subverting the genre of cunning and showing how something that the Torah itself in the 3rd chapter portrays as bad, this is the bad guy. He's saying, no. I'm Chochmah, I dwell in cunning. If you become cunning, you're going to get Chochmah, and then you're going to get all these benefits. And he goes on to advertise them. With me, I provide knowledge of strategies. With me, there is counsel and wisdom. I am understanding. With me is might. Through me, kings will reign, and nobles will decree righteousness. Through me, officials will rule, and nobles, all who judge righteously. Wealth and honor are with me, great fortune and righteousness. My fruits are better than fine gold, even choice gold, and my produce is choicer than silver. I lead in the path of righteousness amid the pathways of justice. I have much to bequeath to those who love me, and I shall fill their storehouses. So he's saying you're going to get all this good stuff through cunning and Chochmah and strategies, but you notice he's also weaving in righteousness into there, okay? So these are the arguments for Chochmah, and this is what Mishlei does. Is it instead? Again, I'm a high school teacher. I see. All right, I'm not going to criticize what anyone else is doing, but I see people who try to impose Judaism and mitzvos and halacha on kids for reasons that they don't value. Okay, but what Mishlei does is it says, oh, you want popularity? Here's how you get it through Chochmah. And don't be like the Mishleic fool who gets it and ends up causing everyone to hate him. Oh, you want love, you want money, you want success? Do it through Chochmah, and I'll show you how to do it. And what happens is you go from being a Mishleic fool, who is someone who's makes decisions based on the immediate, and you're like, oh, he says I can get more money if I use this Chochmah stuff, and you learn Chochmah, and then you start to make intelligent decisions. And you're doing it for reasons that you yourself want. You want money. He's not telling you to want something that you don't actually want. And this is how he gets people into Torah and mitzvos, through showing them how the Torah guides you in getting better at achieving and acquiring things that you already are are wanting. Okay, that's the approach of Mishlei. So that's the generic approach. Let me show you a couple of specific examples, and I'm going to use two examples here. This one is similar to the first one, but Mishlei 10:4. Rush ose kaf ramia vyad harutzim tashir. A deceitful scale makes a pauper, but the hand of the diligent will create wealth. Okay. So again, you ask most people, why shouldn't I use a deceitful scale? Again, deceitful scale is a great way to steal because you don't have to go and do an act of robbery. You just miscalibrate the scale so you're overcharging a little bit, and you set it and forget it, as some commercial said from my childhood. So you would think that, like, okay, he would tell you not to use deceitful scales because the Torah is against falsehood and deception, and like you should pursue tzedek and righteousness. No, he says if you use a false scale, you're going to become poor. How are you going to become poor? So Metzudas David doesn't fully explain, but he does spell it out. He says a deceitful scale makes a person poor. That is, one who weighs with a deceitful scale in order to defraud people will become poor because of this. But the hand of the diligent, the hand of those who are diligent, active, and toil for their sustenance, and whose dealings are not deceptive, that hand will make its owner wealthy. So we need to explain this. If this were in Mishlei shiur, we would go in depth. But what it means is that if you steal, you might get away with making some profit, but then if you get caught, you will totally wreck your reputation and no one will trust you ever again, and you won't be able to do business with people. But if you have a reputation of being hardworking and honest, that, even though it's not going to pay off in the big bucks in the beginning, it will eventually cause people to trust you and your business will increase. So that's the type of argument he makes. Okay. I want to give one more example about how Mishlei does this. And this is perhaps the most controversial one. I don't want people to think that this is typical. Okay. But this is the pasuk I had wanted to teach Adira. I was like, I actively, like, after COVID, we learned Mishlei, and I think we did this pasuk. So this is in 25, 21 through 22. Imra ev sona'acha ha'achilehu lachem. If your enemy is hungry, feed him bread, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For you will be heaping hot coals upon his head, and Hashem will reward you. Okay, so you can understand how this works. I'll read the Metzudas David. He says, by feeding him, you cause him anguish, as though you had scooped burning coals from the fire and placed them on his head. For he will be greatly ashamed that you repay him good for evil. Okay, so what is he telling you how to do? Yeah? Kill him with kindness, but he's telling you how to take revenge. Now, what does the Torah say about revenge? Don't do it. It's usur, right? It's actually a lo ta'aseh to take revenge. But he's telling you how to do it. Now, the Metzudas David goes on and he says like this. This part I want to read in Hebrew because it's epic. V'im ki techashev ze lenekama, even though this is considered revenge, mikol makom yishalem lecha Hashem sachar tzedakah. Even though this is considered revenge, nevertheless, God will reward you with the reward of tzedakah. How does it work? Because what are you actually doing? Tzedakah is actually providing for someone's needs. Okay? So what you're doing is your enemy is hungry and thirsty, and you're giving him food and water. Now, you're doing it because you want to see him suffer, because you're killing him with kindness, but technically, it's tzedakah. Now, this is not the highest motivation for doing tzedakah, obviously, but again, this is a very Mishleic approach, which is that you want to do things that cause your enemy pain, but you have to keep halacha. So let me show you how to do it in a way where I'm gonna teach you a way where you can get inflict maximum pain, but you're actually doing a mitzvah, and meanwhile, because you're giving him tzedakah, and you're in the meantime cultivating your relationship to the mitzvah of tzedakah by doing this. Okay, so again, very extreme example, but that's the kind of thing that Mishlei does. Okay, any questions? Yeah, Shuva. That's bad. Right.
But like, how is it? Like I'm asking about like the instant.
Okay, that's a very
Very bad. Not very bad. People getting to good things.
yeah. All right, that's a great question, and it's a bit of a pet topic of mine, which is we say that there's lishma, which is doing something for the right reasons, and then lo lishma, which is the wrong reasons. And my question is always, how low can you go in lo lishma, and it still like works and is good? Great question. I have an article on my Substack, which I can send you later on, but I think that'll take us too far afield for now. Okay, so what we've seen so far is how you go from being a Mishleic fool, someone who's preoccupied with immediate pleasure and avoiding immediate pain, to being a Mishleic chacham, to thinking about the consequences and the long-term benefits of your actions. Okay, that part was always obvious to me, that selfishness is the route to this, because everyone wants pleasure and everyone doesn't like pain. So if I can show you in a systematic way how to train yourself to get more pleasure, then of course it'll work. Okay, but that's not the end goal of Mishle. Okay, what is the highest level in Mishle? So Mishle has these archetypes, we call them, these different characters, of embodying different ideals of wisdom and righteousness and of foolishness and wickedness. So there's the Mishle, they say, well, when I was young, they used to say Eskimos have 30 words for snow. I think you have to say Inuits have 30 words for snow now. Okay, and I don't know if that's true, but Shlomo invented 30 words for fools. Okay, and there's all these different kinds of fools, and he diagnoses the fools. So there's a Ksil, there's an Avil, there's an Atzel, there's a Rasha, there's a Belial. So there's a bunch of good guys as well. There's the Chacham, there's the Arum, there's the Yashar, there's the Tam. So the highest level of Mishle is Tzaddik. Okay, now the word Tzaddik, righteous person, has different meanings in different contexts. Okay, so in Torah, if we're talking about Torah, usually Tzaddik has something to do with keeping mitzvos. In Tehillim, there might be a different definition. In a court of law, a Tzaddik and a Rasha Bedin, there's a different definition. So in Mishle, I find that the definition of the Mishlaic Tzaddik is best expressed by the Rambam, okay, who was not writing on Mishle, but the second to the last chapter of the More Nevuchim, he defines Tzedek, okay, righteousness, and you can infer a definition of Tzaddik from that. So he says, the word tzedakah is derived from tzedek, which means righteousness or uprightness. The meaning of righteousness is to bring every lawfully governed being in line with its lawful principle and to give every existing thing that which is proper for its existence. Now, that's a little bit abstract, and for our purposes, I'm just going to say that an elementary definition is bringing someone in line with either what legally is mandated for them or with what their nature or their needs are, okay? So hold that in mind. We'll give examples in a second. He says, but in the books of the prophets, fulfilling duties imposed upon you with regard to others is not called tzedakah. In the first sense, if you pay a hired man his wages, this is not called tzedakah. Okay, so in other words, technically, when you owe someone money and you give them money, technically that could be called tzedakah, but Tanakh doesn't use it that way. Okay, but it says, therefore, so on the other hand, the good we bestow upon others out of virtue is called tzedakah, meaning if you're acting based on good midos, that is tzedakah, such as alleviating the suffering of the afflicted. Therefore, the Torah says, with reference to the returning of collateral to the poor man, so that he could use it at night, it shall be a tzedakah for you. Okay, now, let me pause here. Definition of tzedakah is giving every being what is their due, okay? So if I ask you, when I give a poor man his collateral so he could use it at night, or when I visit the sick, or when I give money to the poor, what makes that tzedakah? What would you guess based on the definition? Yeah, Tshuva? Yeah, it's what everyone deserves. You're a human being who has needs, and you're providing them with their needs, right? So you would think that that is what makes my action an action of tzedakah. Now, halachically, that is true. Midot Raisa tzedakah is de machsoro asher yachsar lo, is whatever the person is lacking, you're obligated to give them. And there are a bunch of other halachos, but halachically, you give them what they need. But that's not how the Rambam explains that this is an act of tzedakah, okay? So he says like this. Why? So again, the question here is, why is it when I do something nice, like visiting, not nice, when I visit the sick or I give tzedakah to the poor, why is that an act of tzedakah for me? For when you follow the path of virtue, you do tzedek, you do righteousness to your rational soul, for you have given it in accordance with its rightful claim, okay? So in other words, for this reason, every virtue is called tzedakah. So in other words, when I give tzedakah to the poor person, okay, it's true that I'm giving him what he needs, and the result is tzedakah because I'm fulfilling his needs. But what makes my action a human action of tzedakah is I am giving my rational soul, my Tzelem Elokim, the part of me that perceives truth and justice and objective good, I'm giving that its due. So what do you see? It's a selfish definition, okay? You're giving, when it's tzedakah because you are treating your mind in a way that is giving it its due, because really all human beings are inherently equal. We're all the same species. We just have different circumstances. So if I have a resource that I could be giving you and you need it, on what basis am I saying that, like, I deserve this more than you do? In other words, when I treat everyone as a human being and I view them based on their objective needs, I'm acting rationally and I'm doing tzedakah to my mind, okay, and to the other person as well. Okay, so it's a very interesting definition of tzedakah, but from here I want to extrapolate. Again, let me back up. I'm not extrapolating this definition from the Rambam. I'm learning this from Mishlei, but I think this fits Mishlei's definition of the tzaddik. Mishleik tzaddik is someone who, so let me contrast it. A fool makes decisions based on the immediate pain, immediate pleasure. A chacham makes decisions based on long-term pleasure and pain. The tzaddik is not just thinking of himself, he's thinking of the entire system. The tzaddik's goal is he recognizes that he is part of a system. That system has many parts to it, other people. And if I do what is good for the entire system, then it'll benefit everyone, including me. As Marcus Aurelius reportedly said, I think this is a misquote, but what's good for the hive is good for the bees. That if you take care of the system, it benefits you. An example I used to give high schoolers is let's take the Mishleik fool, the Mishleik chacham, and the Mishleik tzaddik and play out a normal everyday case. Okay, so let's say you find a lost object of value, like I used to say iPods, but I guess you have to say AirPods, or can you use other people's AirPods or Labubus or whatever the kids are into these days? You find one of these things on the ground. Okay, so what is the Mishleik fool going to do if he finds an object of value on the ground? He's going to keep it, right? Because I get free stuff. Okay, but there's something short-sighted about that. All right, if you had to explain to this guy why you shouldn't just take stuff that you find in Mishleik terms, what would you say? Yeah. Oh, okay. So that is true. That's already going a little bit beyond. Yeah, Ashley. Okay. All right. I think most basic thing, right? Yeah. People aren't going to like you, right? If they find out that you are taking stuff that's theirs, they're not going to like you. Also, one of the mistakes that kids would routinely make in Shalhevet, this is probably true of other schools. There are cameras everywhere. You can't just steal stuff without getting caught and they'll catch you, And there are, whatever. Not that anyone stole stuff and she'll have it, but I'm just people forget that there are cameras everywhere. The same school I teach in now also. So the thing is you're being very short-sighted by stealing, okay? So now the chacham, okay, someone who's interested in their own benefit, but long-term, why? So they will return the lost object, but what would be some selfish reason for returning the lost object that would benefit them? Yeah? Good. You can get a reward. It might be tangible. It might be goodwill. I think here's where you would say, now if I lose something, then the person will return it for me. So the chacham is still thinking long-term benefits, but to the self. But the tzaddik is thinking one level beyond that, which is what kind of system do we want to live in? I want to live in a system where people care about each other's objects, okay? Because that's going to benefit everyone, and therefore I will go out of my way to return a lost object, even if it doesn't directly benefit me, because I'm contributing to the system, and ultimately that's going to be good for everyone, including myself. Okay, so that is the Mishleik tzaddik. And again, I'm not saying this is the only definition of tzaddik, but again, you have here the fool who thinks short term, the chacham who thinks longer term, but still with the self, and the tzaddik who gets into his tzedakah also through selfishness, but selfishness with a much broader view of the system that says, I'm just a part of the system. Yes. Okay. So now we get into the metaphysical, okay, which is a fun word to use, but we have to define what we mean. Okay. So one of the questions, like I said in the very beginning, that I want to answer here is, how far can you take this selfishness? In other words, can you become someone who is fully endorsed by Hashem and travel the full road of human perfection through selfishness? Okay. I was in doubt about this, and the thing that caused me to have doubt is there is a level higher than the tzaddik, okay, which is the chassid. Okay, now chassid, not Hasidic movement chassid, but chassid as in an ish chesed, a person of kindness. Okay, and the reason why I doubted whether this is something that, Mishlei is this book of selfishness, and I doubted whether you can become selfishly kind, because I noticed that for years, Mishlei does not really deal that much with chesed. Okay, and today was the first day I actually decided to prove this to myself. So I just did a simple search for instances of the word chachma or chacham in Mishlei versus one of my other favorite books, Tehillim. Okay, Mishlei, those two terms are used total of 85 times. Tehillim, only 8 by my search, which is very shocking to me. Okay, fine. What about tzaddik or tzedek or tzedakah? So Mishlei, 93 times. Tehillim, 135 times. Okay, so a lot. Now again, this is not scientific. I mean, I'm just looking to get a sense of this. What about Chasid or Chesed? So Tehillim, 153 times, Mishlei, 12 times. So I start looking through the Psukim in Mishlei, and I noticed that a lot of the Psukim in Mishlei that purport to talk about Chesed are not really talking about Chesed. They're just talking about selfishness in other forms. Okay, so for example, in Mishlei 11:17, Gomel nafsho ish chased v'ocher she'ero achzari. A kind person does good to himself, but a cruel person troubles his flesh. Okay, and the Metzudas David says someone who does good to his own nefesh hamisaveh, his appetitive soul, meaning if you're good to your psyche, your emotions, by giving it sufficiently of its necessary needs to keep it alive and maintain it in a state of health, is certainly a person of kindness. For just as he has compassion on his own soul, so will he have compassion on the soul of another. But one who afflicts his own flesh and starves himself out of concern for money, all the more so is he cruel to others. Now, again, we're not going to analyze this in depth. This is not a Mishlei shiur, but the point is that he's saying you have to be, as they say today, you have to be kind to yourself, and you do. Like if you are depriving yourself of your basic emotional and physical needs, you're not going to be able to, first of all, to assess those needs in others, but you're also not going to be functioning properly. So in other words, this is advocating self-kindness. Yeah, that's the oxygen mask thing. Exactly, right. Okay, so that's one example. Here's another example. Mishlei 14:34. Tzedakah teromim goy v'chesed l'umim chatas. Righteousness, tzedakah, lifts up a nation. V'chesed l'umim chatas, but the kindness of regimes is sin. Okay, so many of the Mefarshim say that this is not talking about doing chesed. It's talking about why, when another nation wants to do kindness to you, you should be suspicious of their motives because they're usually just trying to get something for their favor. So that's what it means that the kindness of regimes is a sin. You should be suspect. And Sadigon even translates this differently. He says that there's a weird use of chesed, which means shame. So he translates as the righteousness uplifts a nation that does it, but the shame of peoples is their sin. He just deletes chesed from the pasuk. So if you look at all these psukim in Mishlei about chesed, it's not very much. So I thought that okay, maybe the reason why Mishlei doesn't talk about chesed is because it's beyond Mishlei, and you need to transcend selfishness in order to get that. Okay. Pause here, by the way. I have to just speak up for Mishlei here. Mishlei, I'm giving these very, very superficial ideas. Mishlei is very, very deep, and we analyze this a lot. I give Mishlei shiurim, at night over Zoom, and we will spend 2 hours on one pasuk. So I don't want to let anyone think that this is the extent of Mishlei. It's not superficial, but I have to use this as data in the shiur. Okay. So, so the question is, can selfishness take you into Chassid territory? Okay. So this is where we go from Shlomo to Soloveitchik. Okay, and again, disclaimer: this is not what the Rav necessarily held. In fact, this book is written by Lawrence Kaplan on a set of notes that were taken in Rav Soloveitchik's shiur. So this is my being inspired by someone else's book on notes of a shiur from Soloveitchik. Okay, so take this with a huge grain of salt. Okay, so let me give you some background for what Rav Soloveitchik is going to talk about here. The central focus here is my two favorite psukim in Nach. Okay, and I think to myself, if you could take any two psukim, and it's like one long pasuk, but it's technically two psukim. You have to take two psukim and put them in a space capsule and send them out and be this is what Judaism is all about. It'd be these two. Okay, it's Yirmiyahu 9:22 through 23. All right. Ko Amar Hashem, and I'm going to read it and translate it and then explain it according to the Rambam and not read the Rambam. I'm just going to explain it here, easier here. Ko Amar Hashem. Al yishala chacham b'chachmaso, v'al yishala hagibor b'gvuraso, al yishala asher b'ashro. Thus said Hashem, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, let not the mighty man glory in his might, let not the rich man glory in his wealth. Im bezos yishala hamishala, only let him who glories glory in this. Haskel v'yadoa osi, haskel is from the word seichel, comprehending and knowing me. Ki ani Hashem, for I am Hashem, oseh chesed mishpat utzedakah ba'aretz, who does kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth, because in these is my desire, says Hashem. Okay, so the Rambam in the last two chapters of the Mora defines a lot of these terms, and the way he explains these psukim is he says there are basically four things that people pursue, four types of excellence or success or perfection. Okay, the lowest level of excellence that people pursue is perfection of possessions. Okay, wealth, titles, status, Gryffindor, pursuing things that are external to yourself, okay? And the reason why that's the lowest is because, first of all, you could take it away, right? It could get taken away. You can, if your house burns down, there goes your house, and nothing in you changed. It's not even really part of you. It's something that you own. It's a legal fiction on paper, right? So that's the lowest level. Okay, higher level is perfection of the physical. Okay, whether that is strength, health, beauty, whatever it is, that is part of you, but it's not you as a human. It's you as a physical being, as an animal. Okay, and Rambam says you're never going to be. Well, he doesn't. You're never going to be strong as a gorilla. You're never going to be as fast as a cheetah. He didn't use those examples, but whatever. So it's not really you, and you're not really going to truly excel in it. Higher than that is perfection of midos, perfection of ethics, ethical, character development, morals. And there the Rambam makes statements that people think are controversial, okay, which we'll address the controversy in a second, which is, he says, midos are definitely good and they're definitely part of you, but they're only a means to an end. They're a means to the higher level of perfection, okay, which we'll identify in a moment. But also he says, you don't need midos unless you're in a society. And if you're on a desert island, then midos don't really do you much good. Now, I don't fully buy that, because anyone who has seen the movie Castaway, where Tom Hanks is on a desert island by himself, knows that patience would really serve him well. Or if you are haughty and arrogant and you think that everything is going to just automatically align with your desires, those midos affect you even when you're in isolation. So Lord of the Flies is a society. They're not by them. It's not one person by himself. What was that?
It's a society of boys who don't have.
Oh, correct. Yeah, right. So you see the necessity of it, right? So we'll hold those two questions, okay? About don't we need midos when we're alone, and is it really midos is just instrumental? Really, highest level of perfection is, surprise, surprise, from the Rambam, knowledge of God. Okay, and by knowledge of God we mean knowledge of all of reality, of which God is the most fundamental, knowledge through Torah, knowledge through science, knowledge of reality, because what are you? You are a human being. You are a Tzelem Elokim, you're a truth seeker, and the thing that makes you unique is your ability to have this abstract knowledge, okay? And Rambam says that midos is just a means to doing that. And now let me go back and read the psukim the way that he says it. So he says, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom. Earlier in the chapter, he says wise man sometimes means someone who has perfected their midos. So he says it's not about midos. Let not the mighty man glory in his might. That's physical perfection. It's not about physical perfection. Let not the wealthy man glory in his wealth. That it's not about wealth and possessions. But let him who glorieth glory in this, comprehending and knowing me, Hashem. Right? That is knowledge of God. Yes. Right. Yes. Yeah. Right. You took the Slytherin word right out of my mouth. Self-actualization. Yeah. We'll get to that as well. So yes, this is the Maimonidean hierarchy of needs. Okay. So okay, but the Rambam points out that the puzzle does not end there. Okay, it does not say that the purpose is to know God, period, or to know that God is one, or to know that God has no likeness. It says to know that I am Hashem who does chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah on earth, who does kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth, because in these is my desire. And the Rambam concludes the more Nevuchim by talking about how someone who has real knowledge of God will naturally seek to emulate God and to enact the attributes, so to speak, of God that he has apprehended with his mind, which is kindness, justice, righteousness, and all the other things that God is called. So in other words, the way that the Rav frames it is he says, ethics does play a major role, but there are two stages of ethics. He calls it the pre-theoretical ethics, which is ethics as a preparation for being involved in the pursuit of knowledge. But then once you pursue knowledge, there's a post-theoretical ethics where your knowledge of how God works and how he runs the universe and what his attributes are lead you to want to emulate that, and then you emulate that in ethical behavior. Okay, that's a broad overview of Rav Soloveitchik. And I'm also going to just, okay, so now let me get into I think that's enough background. Let me just do one more piece of background here, okay, which is the Rambam's definition of chesed, okay. So we defined tzedakah, but the Rambam's definition of chesed is sort of built on tzedakah, which is, he says, in our commentary on Avos, we have explained the expression chesed as denoting an excess. Okay, so chesed just means excess. It is especially used of extraordinary beneficence, so excess good. You could use it for bad, but it's usually good. Chesed is practiced in two ways. First, to bestow good to those who have no claim whatsoever upon us. Second, to bestow good to a person to whom it is due in greater measure than is due them. So for example, some rando on the street is there and I say like, hey, want $50? And, I give them $50 that I don't owe them. That would be a chesed because I didn't owe them anything, but I gave them, this qualitative benefit that they didn't have. The other is, I owe you money for some service and I say, keep the change, So that would be chesed because I owed you X amount and I'm giving you more than that. Okay. So he goes on, he says, in the holy writings, the term chesed occurs mostly in the sense of showing kindness to those who have no claim to it whatsoever. For this reason, the term chesed is employed to express the good bestowed upon us by God. Okay, on this account, the act of creation is an act of God's chesed. As it says, olam chesed yibaneh, the universe is built up in chesed. Now, why is God's creation of the universe chesed by this definition? If chesed is bestowing a good that is not owed, why do we call God's creation of the universe chesed? Yeah. He didn't owe anyone anything because there was no anyone, right? It was a pure act of goodness, not owing anything. God didn't need to do it. He wasn't compelled to do it, but he bestowed good when nothing existed, okay? Now, at this point, I'm going to read from the Rav, and then I'm going to explain my takeaway while stepping around a very, very dicey topic, okay? So the Rav says, summarizing the Ram, he says like this, and don't worry, we're getting back to our question, okay? God's creation of the world for Maimonides means letting others participate in his existence, capital H, okay? That is, there are others, but they exist by virtue of participating in his existence. Before creation, God was all exclusive, negating the existence of anything other than him. Creation is an act of God turning toward an outside by allowing the world to exist insofar as it would partake of God's existence. As a result of creation, God is still all. He is no longer, however, all exclusive, but all inclusive, including the world in his own existence. The world exists in God. Okay, so I read that and I was like, that sounds a little bit like pantheism, okay? Or panentheism, which pantheism is the belief that God and the universe are somehow equal, or the universe is God, and panentheism is that God is in the universe. And I know that there are streams of thought in Judaism and without that hold by panentheism and pantheism, but not the Rambam. Okay, Rambam does not hold that God is in the universe, but the Rav does use the word ontological pantheism, and he goes on to talk about stuff that was way above my pay grade, about how to reconcile this idea of God's unique existence with the fact that everything exists in God, but not really in a way that violates the Rambam's metaphysics, and how, rather than trying and doing a horrible job of explaining the Rav, I'm going to tell you what my takeaway is from that, okay? And I'll ground it in something that we all have heard, okay? Which is there is a name that we use for God, hamakom, okay? Which literally means the place. Okay, and I think most people statistically probably know it from the Haggadah, which is Baruch Hamakom Baruch Hu. We talk about that, and people know it from comforting mourners. Hamakom Yinachem Eschem. May Hamakom console you. Now, people mistranslate it as the omnipresent. Okay, and I say mistranslation because the Rambam would say that that's a mistranslation because omnipresent means present in all places, and according to the Rambam, not just the Rambam, but according to the Rambam, God is not only non-physical, but he has no physical qualities. And place or location is a physical quality. So to say that God is omnipresent does not make any sense according to the Rambam. And whenever I teach this to high schoolers, there's one high schooler who tries to argue and that no, God really is everywhere. So I say, is God blue? No. Is God green? No. Is God all colors? No. Is God 5 feet tall? No. Is God 10 feet tall? No. Is God all feet tall? No. Is God here? No. Is God there? No. Is God everywhere? No. Okay, case solved. Right? Just saying all does not help the physical issue. Okay, so what does hamakom mean? Okay, if it doesn't mean omnipresent, what does it mean? So Chazal say this in many places. I think the earliest source is the Talmud Yerushalmi in Makos 3:13 that says, "Mipnei ma mechanim shemo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'korin oso makom." Why do we give God this nickname and call him Makom? By the way, hamakom is not used in Tanakh as a name of God per se. There's allusions to it, but Chazal coined the term. So why did Chazal call God Makom? Lomar shehu makomo olamo ve'in olamo makomo. To say that God is the place of his universe, but the universe is not his place. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, the universe is not his place is the easy one. God is not in the universe because he's not physical. He's not in anything. But what does it mean that the universe is his place? Okay, yes. Right, that could be as well, right? That also is misleading. And again, these are all metaphors, okay? And we do, by the way, elsewhere in Kedusha say, Aye makom kavoda, where is the place of his glory? Which I think is like a rhetorical question. Like there is no actual place, but insofar as this name, yeah, what does it mean that the place of the universe is God is the place of the universe, right? So my understanding of this, and the Rav says this in this book. I'm just trying to sidestep all of the pantheism stuff. That it gets back to the opening halachos of the Rambam, that the Rambam says in the beginning of Yesodei HaTorah, of the laws of the foundations of Torah, that that God is the independent existence and our existence is contingent on him. In other words, nothing can exist without God's will, not just in terms of bringing it into existence, but sustaining it in existence. And we say in od milvado, there is nothing other than him. And I know the bumper stickers also say that. I don't know what they mean, but what the Rambam means is there's no independent existence besides God, okay? So in that sense, my understanding is that's what the Rav means, is that everything, just like this Stender is the place of this phone, right? It's like the substratum, if you want to use like the fancy logical term here, without it, then the thing is not in its place. So too, God is the foundation of existence, that existence cannot exist without God because all existences are contingent and God is not dependent on anything else. Okay, so in that sense, you could say that everything exists in God's existence, meaning that nothing has existence outside of God. Really, it's a negation. It's not saying that everything exists in God because then you run into all these problems. It's saying nothing can exist outside of God. And in that sense, to use the Rav's term, that God's existence is all inclusive. Okay, so now we're ready to go back to Slytherin and the Chassid and Chesed and selfishness. Okay, so this line is the line that I saw and was like, oh, answering all my questions, and I got to give a shiur for Adira about this. Okay, which is like this. Okay, the Rav says, just as with reference to God, there are no others, in the sense that there are no others who are not included in his existence, the way that I explained it. I mean, nothing can exist outside of God, without God. For God is as abundant in loving kindness. Sorry, God as abundant in loving kindness will that all others should participate in his existence. So man should reach the level of, wait for it, egocentric ethical performance, where there are no human others, for he wills that all human others should participate in his existence. Now, what does that mean? Okay, like with the Rav, you have to read it like 10 times, okay? But here we have Lawrence Kaplan who explains. So this is the explanation. He says, paradoxically, in this passage, the Rav describes the highest level of ethics as a form of egocentrism. For the Rav, egocentrism refers to the focus on oneself and not on others. But as the Rav makes clear, the meaning he ascribes to egocentrism is the polar opposite of its standard meaning. The standard meaning of egocentrism refers to focusing on oneself and not on others, because I have selfishly excluded others from my sphere of existence. The highest level of ethics as a form of egocentrism for the Rav also refers to focusing on oneself and not on others, but not because I have excluded those others from my sphere of existence, but as the above passage makes clear, I have, in godlike fashion, included them in my sphere of existence, in which case there are no longer any others. Okay, so in other words, your egocentrism is so all-encompassing that you are including all others in your existence and they're no longer others. Now, that's still a little abstract. So I'm going to give you an example from the Rav, and then I'm going to give an example that I feel like I can relate to, and then we'll see if that answers our questions. Okay, this is the last, I think it's the last story. Oh, yeah, okay. So he says, so this is an example from the Rav. He says, let us say I am committed to genuinely helping a poor man, okay? I'm genuinely committed to furthering his well-being. My ethical act absorbs my whole being, which I subordinate to the person I am out to help. My personality is still individual, still unique, still all-inclusive, exclusive. I help out the thou, but he remains other to me. I exist in my particular way, others exist in their particular way. No one exists in the way I exist. The thou exists, and I commit myself, I subordinate myself to his well-being, but he exists as thou, and I do not understand the particular way in he exists. So that's the before you're egocentrically Slytherin Chesed, okay? But now, there's a higher level. Ethics is egocentrism. Here, in helping out this poor person, my personality shifts from being all exclusive to being all inclusive. The poor man is no longer an other, separate from me. In godlike fashion, my helping him out becomes a way of letting him share in my existence and reality. My helping him out thus becomes an act of imitatio Dei, imitating God, an act of godlike chesed in the sense that I do not simply give to him, but I identify with him. On this level, then, it makes no sense to speak of my commitment to the other, for there is no other. So let me give you an example I can relate to, which is a halacha. In the, I'm going to read the Rambam's version, but it's halacha in the relationship between a student and a teacher. Okay, appropriately enough, right? Hatalmidim mosifim chachmas harav umarchivin libo. Students increase the wisdom of the teacher and expand his mind. Amru chachamim harbe chachma lamadati. I learned a lot of wisdom from my rabbis, from my teacher. Sorry, I learned a lot of wisdom. Mechaverai yeser mirabosai, from my peers, my friends, more than from my teachers. Umi talmida yoser mikulam, and from my students more than from everyone. Okay. Ukeshem she'etz katan madlik es hagadol, just like a small piece of kindling ignites a large one or a large fire. Kach talmid katan mechaded es harav, so too an inferior student can sharpen the teacher. Until the point where he brings forth with his questions wondrous wisdom. So let's play this through all three levels here. Okay, so you start off as a fool. Okay, you're only involved in short-term selfishness. Okay, so you don't teach anyone at all. Okay, but then you realize, oh, you know what? If I teach people, it actually makes me learn more. Okay, and that's why some of us go into teaching, because we learn better when we teach people. So you start teaching, but you're doing it as a selfish act, where you're teaching and you're gaining from it, and you're gaining more than the students are gaining from it, right? That's what he says. I learn a lot from my rabbis. I learn more from my parents than most from my students. So you're gaining from it. Okay, that would be like a chacham. Okay, tzaddik might go one level further, where you are dedicated to the entire system. Okay, where you realize that like you're part of something greater than yourself that's going to outlast you, and you want to get as much learning out there as possible because it's good for everyone, and you do partake of that, but it's not necessarily about you because you've expanded yourself even beyond that to the entire system. But then a chassid would be recognizing that God's value, you're emulating God's values and God's midos. Again, in the world of the Rambam, midos are not traits, they're modes of action, they're the way that God relates to his creations. So you are seeing things, so to speak, from the divine perspective to the extent that you can humanly can, where you're seeing what is a human being, how do we fit into society, what role do what role do I play in the entire system, and you're basically identifying through your knowledge with God's values and then enacting them, because if you grasp God's chesed but you don't enact it, then the knowledge is not real to you. In other words, if you really see that this is good, you will enact it. And the way the Rav is expressing it here is that when you do this with all of God's midos, so to speak, and you are seeing God's actions with your mind and all the good, and you're identifying with that and naturally doing good. So what happens is you've brought everyone into the sphere of your own existence by them in this world of learning and beneficence that started with yourself, but now you're fully actualizing it, not just in your mind, but in the world around you as well. So it's a level that is beyond the tzaddik, in that it's not just based on the local system, the way that you can derive from it here. It's based on trying to see things from a divine perspective. And when you do that, then you've dissolved all others, and you are relating to them in a godlike fashion. You're literally becoming a vehicle for God's midos in the world, and it's through your knowledge and your understanding. Before I have a conclusion that has to do with Adira. We're going to bring this back to Adira. But any questions on any of what we said so far? All right, good. I was told 45 minutes, and it's 45 minutes. Yeah, okay, it's good. Okay, so I was thinking about this, and this really did help me to appreciate another dimension of Adira. Okay, first of all, I think that where do I want to start with this? So I'll have to replay the conversation that we just had. So I said, Adira to me identified as a Slytherin, okay? And, there is this theory that you can have a dual identity, like a hybrid, like Ravenclaw, Slytherin. And I said, was Adira like a Hufflepuff? And Anne said, yes, she kept on taking the test and kept on getting Hufflepuff. And then she just kept on doing it until she got Slytherin, and I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because Adira she wore her empathy on her sleeve, okay? And, I used to see, again, ninth graders are, not very mature all along. So I would see ninth graders doing things that embarrassed them, and she would cringe and like not be able, anyone being in a state of pain would cause her pain, And so I thought to myself, is that helpful? But what I realized is that there is a destination where you are so, self-actualized and so compassionate that you do genuinely, the empathy, you view other people as an extension of yourself, not in the superficial way where like a Gryffindor way where you only identify with them because they're on the same team, but you genuinely identify with the humanity in them. And I want to read two things. This first one I'm reading just to set the stage, okay? One of my other Slytherin mentors is Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee I like for his philosophy. I've never seen a martial art movie of his, but one of my favorite quotations of his, I think really does speak to the life that Adira lived. So it's actually two quotations here. So he says, self-actualization is the important thing. And I think, as you mentioned, self-actualization really is what a Slytherin is all about, is actualizing yourself. And again, in a Jewish framework, what that means is you were created as a human being who has the capacity to have knowledge, and you have unique qualities as a particular human being. And self-actualization is becoming an actualized Tselem Elohim, but making use of all the strengths that you have and contributing in a unique way to the world. So self-actualization is the important thing. And my personal message to people is that I hope they go towards self-actualization rather than self-image actualization. I hope that they will search within themselves for honest self-expression. Yes, there's a difference between self-actualization and self-image actualization. Most people live only for their image. As I read this, think about how not Adira this was. Most people live only for their image. That is why, whereas some have a self, a starting point, most people have a void because they are so busy projecting themselves as this or that, dissipating all their energy in projection and conjuring up a facade rather than centering their energy on expanding or broadening their potential or expressing and relaying this unified energy for efficient communication and so forth. When another human being sees a self-actualizing person walk past, he cannot help but say, hey, now there's someone real, okay? And I think that is something that we got from seeing Adira as a self-actualized person. But what I wanted to end with, the very last thing I want to do is, I did not know about Adira's writing during Shalhevet. I only saw, afterwards when these things started being shared. And I think the first poem that I saw from her was, I don't know what the title was, but I want to read from it and just highlight the Slytherin aspects of this as we've highlighted them tonight, okay? So she says, so this is addressed to God, right? Why should I tell you anything when you already know it? When you can see my hopes and dreams, my fears and anxieties, when no truth can hide and no lies can live. Why talk when you know what I'm going to say? So I don't. I pick up a sitter. I don't recite prayers written ages ago in a language I can barely understand. I don't talk. There's no point in talking. But as the phrase goes, actions speak louder than words. So I show, I write, I create, I perform. That, again, self-actualization and self-actualization, she's not doing it to show off to people. She's doing it because this is who she is, Each word, every act is proof that the passions and skills that you have granted me has not gone to waste. My pen is my sitter and my stories are my davening, my thanks for this gift, this ability to show the world what I see and feel. None of it mentions you by name, but it doesn't have to. You're already there. Pen on paper, text on a screen. It's a manifestation of the creativity of mankind. Again, the creativity in the sense of the self-actualization here is the outstanding quality. The mankind I am a part of. Again, seeing yourself as part of the entire system of the mankind you created. What you wrote is a beautiful story, so don't blame me for wanting to make my own. And don't blame me for when I try to connect, I pick up a pen instead of a sitter. Because I guess in a way, I'm talking to you just in my own way. So that is the self-actualization. And that is really why I think that she really was a Slytherin at heart with some Hufflepuff empathy thrown in. But I think, like her brother said, we knew Adira in different ways during her lifetime. And we are learning ways that she could be a role model today. And it is remarkable that someone who was that young, was so much herself from day one, and then it just continued to expand. And we all got to see that in different times. And so I hope we all can take a lesson from these ideas and with Adira as the model and continue to follow in those ways. Thank you.